Hey everyone, this is Laurie Delk Radecki, and I am here with you tonight for another one of my Laurie's lessons. And tonight I'm going to talk to you about how God usually reveals the next step, not the whole journey. And so, in most of my lessons, everyday stuff, right? We discover one simple truth to help us to choose faith and to live on purpose. Because, like my book says, we all have choices, right? So, today's lesson is one that is very personal to me. And, like I said, it is called God Usually Reveals the Next Step, not the whole journey. Have you ever wished that God could just hand you the entire blueprint for your life? Right? I mean, I have literally prayed before. God, please, could you just write the answer down for me and put it in my mailbox? I'm like, God, you can do anything. Could you just write it down for me and put it in my mailbox so I know for sure? But, wouldn't that be nice to know exactly where you're going, like what decisions to make, when things will happen, exactly how things will turn out? But if you've walked with the Lord for very long, you've probably discovered something, and that's usually not how He works. And more often than not, God gives us enough light just for the next step, not for the next 10 steps. And the same thing, I remember praying over several different seasons of my life, saying, "Okay, Jesus, what next?" And like, I'm very analytical. I like everything charted out. I have the GPS, but I have it in my text. I copy it. I used to write it down. I want the detailed roadmap. But he might give like one impression or one opportunity, might give you one person to encourage, or he might give you just one door to walk through. But the thing is, after you take that one step, then God will show you the next step, right? And looking back now, I can see things that I couldn't see then. And that's the fact that every single step mattered. Each step and each season and each chapter of my book of life prepared me for the next one, right? And so my accounting career, that taught me discipline. Building businesses taught me leadership. And marketing taught me communication. Walking through grief definitely taught me dependence on God. Raising my children taught me perseverance. Speaking to large crowds taught me how to communicate with people. And coaching taught me how to ask better questions. And, you know, sometimes they're all kind of wrapped into one, sometimes they're separate, sometimes they all felt like separate chapters. But now I can see that God was kind of weaving them together for one beautiful story of my book of life, right? But, if God had showed me years ago that I would be doing today what I'm doing, I honestly think I would be overwhelmed. I know I would have. If He would have said, 30 years ago, when I was watching babies in the church nursery and pretty much not talking to anybody that was over the age of 30, that one day I would be speaking on stages in front of tens of thousands of people, I would have been like, no, you have totally got the wrong person for that, right? But he didn't do that. He just said, trust me with today. And so I just want to tell you that, maybe that's where you are right now. Like, maybe you're praying about, what should I do next? you don't have to know the next 5 years. You don't even have to know the next 1 year. You just need to know what's your next faithful step. Maybe it's making a phone call. Maybe it's personally to forgive someone. Maybe it's starting the business that you've been praying about, that you've been thinking about, that you've been longing to do. Maybe it's applying for that job. Maybe it's volunteering at church. Maybe it's writing the first page of the book that God's placed on your heart to help other people. Maybe it's spending more time with Him every morning. The next step never has to be huge, right? Because the biggest journeys usually begin with the smallest acts of obedience. Like, think about Abraham, right? God didn't tell him every detail. He simply said, go. No GPS, no detailed itinerary, just trust me, go, right? And that was the exact same for Moses, for Esther, for Ruth, for the disciples. Time and time again, God would invite ordinary people to simply trust Him before they could see the whole picture. And that's really what faith is, right? Faith isn't knowing every single answer. Faith is believing that God knows every answer. And that's a big difference, right? Because sometimes we think we're waiting on God, but maybe it's God waiting on us to take that step that He's already shown us, right? Like I knew it first when I felt like God was telling me that I was going to get married again. Granted, I admit it, I at first argued and was like, nope, you gave me these widow shoes. I'm good. Leave me alone. You've taught me how to be even more independent. I'm good. And the more I prayed, the more I felt like God was telling me I would get married again. But the same thing, God didn't expect me to just wait, right? God expected me to take action. I wrote down on a piece of paper, front and back, I am attracting a man who, and I put that character or that feature that I wanted, 25 on the front, 25 on the back. And I prayed over that every single day. And I worked on me trying to become everything on that list also that that type of man would want in a woman, right? And, but that's it. You have to take action. You can pray, but you also have to take action too. And finally, I put my information online and I met him in the first day, even though I didn't realize it at first, but I deleted all the other messages. And, but that's a whole nother story for another day. But, think about like, have you ever noticed that headlights on your car, they don't light up like the whole highway in front of you, right? They only show you a little bit of distance ahead, but it still works, right? They get you to go where you're going. And I think that God's guidance a lot of times works the same way. He just gives you enough light for today or this moment's journey, right? And then once you get there, then He'll give you a little bit more. And so, one of my favorite sayings, I have lots of favorite sayings, but one of them is obedience today opens the door for tomorrow. Because if we refuse today's step simply because we can't see next year's plan, we might just miss the thing that God's preparing us for, right? Because if we knew what God's plan was a year from now, we might say, no way. Just like if 30 years ago, if God would have showed me that audience where I spoke in front of over 10,000 people. And if he would have showed that to me and said, "You're speaking on stage," I would have been like, "No way, you got the wrong person signed up for that," right? But it took me lots of steps to get to that point, right? So I just want to encourage you to stop waiting until you have every answer. Stop believing that you need that entire roadmap before you move. Like I said, I am one, I want everything wrote down. I want it to a T. I want my T's crossed, my I's dotted, everything laid out. I have charts after charts after charts and charts within charts and organize everything. And that's the way I like it. But sometimes God just wants you to have faith. And I know for me, that's very hard. I mean, I have faith and that I'm good at. I do know that. But it's very hard for me to not have all the stuff wrote down and figured out. And my husband and I talk stuff to death right before we make a decision. But we pray over it too. So that's the biggest thing. But just ask yourself one simple question. What is the next faithful step that God is asking me to take? And just think about that and pray about that. And not next month, not next year, just think about today. Because every great journey is simply a series of faithful steps, right? So think about Psalm 37:23. The steps of a good man or woman are ordered by the Lord, and he delighteth in his way, right? It says steps. It doesn't say leaps. It doesn't say giant jumps. It doesn't say years. It just says steps, right? And that's one of the things that I talked about when I'm helping widows walk through those next steps of their life. When I'm coaching women, whether it's widows or any other type of woman, I'm talking about let's take our next steps that God has given us in the shoes that God gave us, right? Every step taken with God is a step in the right direction. So just remember that. And thanks so much for joining me with Laurie's lessons. I hope this helped you. If it did, please tag me in your stories, share it with a friend who it might help them too. And my prayer is that you'll stop worrying about seeing the entire journey and just simply trust God today with that next step. Because I do truly believe that when you faithfully take that next step, then God will faithfully reveal tomorrow's step. So, till next time, keep choosing faith and keep living with purpose. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.